Today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate for ad space so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo. I recently joined as a member, and you can too. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with the advertisers that fit your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co.
And please put unprofessional development in the "How did you hear about Podgo?" That will give us a little finder's fee. Thank you. Hello, unprofessionals. So as you know, now we're doing real commercials, not just the silly ones that we normally do. So today I've got with me my daughter Micah. Say hello, Micah.
Hi.
She has an Etsy account. It's called what?
Roo Makes Bracelets.
Roo Makes Bracelets, okay? We'll put a link in the show notes for you for sure. So she makes some friendship bracelets. She even has one that is kind of an unprofessional bracelet where she's made the unpro letters in the bracelet. So if you need a bracelet, go to Roo's Bracelets. Anything else you want to say about your bracelets?
No.
Okay. But she's a little kid. She's 11 years old. She's entrepreneuring. You know, support her. And go to Roo's Bracelets. Click the link in the show notes. Thank you. Say goodbye, Micah.
Bye.
Unprofessionals, we need your help. Mealy and I keep trying to explain to the world how special we are, but they won't believe us. Here's what you can do. Check in the show notes for the link to the People's Podcast Awards. And please nominate us so the rest of the world can realize exactly how amazing we are. Enjoy! Welcome, unprofessionals, to an exciting episode of Unprofessional Development. I'm Tedisco.
And I'm Mealy. And today we've got with us Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. Okay? So you think there's a School of Podcasting? And that's what we're going to get into with him. I've mentioned in another episode that I listen to podcasts about podcasts. And probably my number one podcast about podcasts that I listen to is Dave's podcast. So welcome, Dave. How you doing today?
Oh, thanks for having me. Doing great. Ready to talk a little education, a little podcasting, wherever we want to go.
Cool. Dave always mentioned on his podcast that he considers himself a teacher and that he was a trainer. So give us, describe your teaching credentials for us, Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, I started off, I was a copier technician, and we had a problem where copiers had gone from being a big green button to now they sliced and diced and julienned and everything else. Mm-hmm. And so my manager brought me in. He said, look, we have a problem. He goes, we have a great service staff. We have a great sales staff. He goes, the customer is breaking the equipment because they don't know how to run it. He goes, nice. I need you to fix that. And I go, how do you want me to do that? He goes, I don't really care. Just fix it. So I would go out, set up force. Yeah. I would go out and set up the equipment, and then I would just set up a class, and I had a bunch of handouts, and really I was there on the skies to show you how to run the equipment. I was really there to teach you how to not run the equipment, like running tree bark through the bypass, and paper clips are bad, and don't make copies with the lid open and things like that. But the other thing I did is I would say, well, who makes the most copies in this office? And they'd be like, oh, that's Bill or Jane or whoever. And I would say, great, I need you to stick around a little bit when we're done. And I would go through even deeper into the copy machine, and then I would dub you are the key operator.
Nice.
And so I would just call up, and I put a little sticker, and I said, Bill is the official certified key operator of this machine.
That's genius.
So if somebody said, hey, I can't get this jam out, they would go to Bill first. And then Bill. And so all of a sudden, all these service calls, they just went down the toilet. They were like, well, we're not sending some guy out to go, oh, here, let me get this paper out. Okay, we're fixed, And so from there, they're like, well, do you know anything about computers? And I'm like, well, I used one in college. I actually used a word processor. And so that got me into teaching a lot of Microsoft Office and QuickBooks, but I also did things like time management and customer service and things like that. And the bad news about being in training, at least in the corporate world, is about every 7 years, they hire a bunch of people that can't sell training. And instead of firing the sales staff, they downsize the training staff. So So after being at that company for about 10 years, I got let go, and I didn't have a teaching background. My original degree was in electronic engineering. And so I was like, look, I've made my own manuals. I've done computer-based training. I had a great resume, and everybody was like, yeah, you don't have a teaching degree though. So I had to go back at the ripe old age of 42 and get a teaching degree, and got out of that and went back to teaching at it was like a chain called New Horizons. And again, back to teaching Microsoft Office and things like that. And the fun part was the classes started getting smaller and smaller. And the one day I was teaching an Excel class, and this kid said, hey, have you ever used those two features together? And I did the teacher thing. I said, hey, I know both those features. I've never used them together. Let's write that on the board and we'll talk about it on break.
There we go.
I wrote it on the board, and he asked his phone.
Nice.
And got an answer. And I went, Siri's going to put me out of a job. And five trainers went to 4, went to 3, went to 2. And then I was like, here we go. And so at that point, I had been podcasting for 10 years. And I was like, this podcasting thing seems to be going up. And a lot of companies they were outsourcing the training. A lot of times it wasn't, they had their own training department. So that idea seemed to be kind of going down. And I knew some people at a company called Libsyn, and I called them up and I said, the bad news is I just lost my job. The good news is I'm available to work for you.
Nice.
And they knew me from my podcast, and it took about 2 weeks to kind of figure out. I'm in Ohio and they're in Pennsylvania. So we had to figure out the Ohio, Pennsylvania, tax issues. But, so I still consider myself a teacher. It's just a different format. Instead of a classroom, I'm now doing tech support and, webinars and things like that.
So we don't want to let that go. So just so you guys know, some of you have been listening to podcasts for literally a blip. So Dave was podcasting in the Jurassic Mesozoic era.
Before it was cool.
Yes. He was standing on his roof with he took a piece of paper and he rolled it up like a bullhorn because there were no electronic bullhorns, and I've got a podcast, neighbors.
Yeah. Well, people think I make this up. I used to teach people how to surf the internet because they didn't know what it was back in the days of Hotbot and Lycos and, all these.
Put in the website exactly right because Google wouldn't fix it for you.
No.
My favorite was I taught a class on how to surf the internet, and it was all about search engines and browsers. And at the end, I go, okay, go ahead and surf. And somebody typed in, I'm in Ohio, so they typed in Canton, and they were looking for a television, so they typed in Canton TV. And they got a website on transvestites.
Nice.
And I was like, hey, remember when we talked about the back button? If you could hit the back button, please. So that was fun.
Yes. So I know we want to keep on the education front, but I am still curious on, were you listening or making podcasts first? And what was the first podcast that you listened to and how did that go?
Yeah, I was at that point building websites because I was teaching the class on Microsoft Front Page. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of always a geek and playing on the internet, and I always ended up in the marketing department in one way or another. I was always involved with that kind of because I'm a creative person. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine had come back from a big event, and he said, hey, you know how you missed the MySpace boat? Again, dating myself. And I said, yeah. And he goes, I've just seen the next big thing. It's podcasting. And I go, what's a podcasting? And I remember this vividly. I went to Google, I typed in podcasting, and I got 1.5 pages of results. And I was like, I think we broke the internet. Hold on. Because there wasn't anything. And so, I, at that point there were a handful of podcasts. The first one I ever listened to was, a show called The Daily Source Code. And the host was this guy named Adam Curry, who I knew from, Headbangers Ball on MTV. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, I know that guy. And so that kind of started to suck me in. And when I had been putting out a newsletter for musicians. And so I took that same exact content that was on my blog and in my newsletter and put it out as a podcast. And I'm going to say within a couple weeks, and this is what really sucked me in, is I got a voicemail. Some guy had sent me this MP3 that he attached to an email. And it was from Michael Van Laar from Nuremberg, Germany. Now, at the time, I'm in nowhere, Ohio. I'm in Mogadore, Ohio, me and the cows. And I got some guy on the other side of the planet that not only found my show, but liked it. And I just
Right.
went, oh, and I grabbed my flag and planted it as deep as I could in Planet Podcasting. Cause I'm like, wait a minute, it's geeky. I get to help people on a global basis. And I was like, this has everything I want to do here. So that's when I knew I was hooked.
All right. So you host these like a lot of training sessions and things, right? So when you're teaching, like what do you think would be the percentage of people who are there because they really want to learn the content versus the number of people who are there because they're kind of forced to be there by their company? And how do you kind of deal with that juggling act?
What I did was, because I've had to do, my favorite class ever was I was teaching a police department Microsoft Word. And I walk in and I'm like, hey, how's everybody doing? And blah, blah, blah. And the guy literally sat down. I was like, I don't want to be here. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. He goes, yeah, I just worked 8 hours. So he'd worked like the night shift and now was coming in for an 8 o'clock class. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fun.
Luckily, nothing bad or illegal happens at night. So I'm sure it was very calming.
So it was just a case of, I think every class should start off with, because they're there and they're like, I don't know why I'm here. My boss sent me. So if you can explain to them, okay, you're in Microsoft Word 2.0 or whatever it is, you know, whatever the name of the class is in today's class. And it's not enough to say, we're going to cover mail merge. We're going to talk about table of contents, blah, blah, blah. Those are the features. You also have to say the benefits. So that's where you start to tell stories. And you're like, if you've ever been a person and you have to send, you know, the same message to 6 people and you don't feel like typing it, and like, I'm going to show you how to do that today in about 15 seconds. So now they're like, oh, wait a minute, that might be me, or this and that. And part of it too is if people come in before class, I go to them and say, what are you looking to learn in this class? And that way I can start saying, and so, you know, Jill, you mentioned how you do this thing. We're going to be talking about that later. Also, we have another feature such and such. And Bob, you mentioned that you are going to wait till you hear this. You're going to be doing all your reports using the, so you start to tie it in like, okay, this is actually something I should be paying attention to. So for me, and then a lot of times it's weird. I always point out that, hey, we're going to have a break at 11:15. The bathrooms are the second door on the right. That will be 15 minutes. I'll put a clock up on the screen and you'll see it count down from 15. And just for the record, when it gets to 0, I start the class. So if you come in after 5 minutes of me starting like the second session and you want me to go back and review the first 5 minutes that you just missed, I'm not going to do that. So just so you know, 15 minutes is 15 minutes. So plan accordingly. You don't have to take notes because your book is right here. So everything we talk about is here. In fact, we're going to go through that. So you just kind of get all the things that they're worried about. Like, I'm never going to remember this. Yep. I hope I don't have to hold my pee all day. You know, lunch is an hour. This is going to, so all the things that they're like, ugh. And now it's like, now let's have some fun. And then I always try to incorporate stories. I remember when I used to teach Microsoft Excel, like the very first one. And it'd be like, okay, let's say you've got 3 salesmen. All right. The first one's name is Larry. And I'm like, Larry sold, 10 widgets. Okay, great. The second salesman's name is Curly. And right there, anybody over 30 goes, oh, I know where he's going with this.
Right, I know.
And so it was a whole Three Stooges thing.
Here comes Shemp.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just something that, and then if you're crazy enough to throw in a nyuk, nyuk, nyuk every now and then, anything to make them giggle. Exactly. My favorite thing that for me is I had 2 teachers. I had a teacher in college. His name was Jim Blackstock. And he would literally come in and blow off the first 10 minutes of class. Now, the class was technical report writing. It does not get any more dry.
Wow. I want to take that technical report writing. That sounds awesome.
So he would come in and blow off the first 10 minutes and just crack jokes and connect with the students. And then he's like, all right, I guess we should do some work. And at that point, you like the guy so much, you just would do whatever he said. Yeah. And then the other one is I had a niece that was 3 and she was like spooky smart. Like you almost want to go, hey, get her away from the computer. Here, play with a Barbie. You're getting a little too weird. But the one day I walked by and she's just laughing and having a good old time. And I go, Emily, what are you doing? She goes, I'm learning with Roger Rabbit. And I go in and she's this little kid. She's already got her ABCs down and her 1, 2, 3, but she's having a blast. And I went, if you can make education fun, it doesn't seem so much like school.
There you go.
I would always try to crack jokes, or anytime I could make a story behind whatever the heck we're doing. And if you could make it fun or entertaining, people would then stay awake.
And now for a word from our sponsors.
Hey guys, this is an advertisement. A commercial if you want to know what it is.
And they do.
So this is especially for you folks in North Kakalaki and South Kakalaki. You have a house, you have a car, you have life. What do you need? You need insurance. You go, you know what? If I could buy my insurance from a former teacher, that's what I'd like to do. Hey Tedisco, do you know anyone that has a business selling insurance who used to be a teacher?
You know I do, and I think you do too. Pimentel?
Yeah, he used to teach with us, but he doesn't anymore. And apparently there's some guy Garcia that he knows. So they've got insurance. You need insurance. There's a link in the show notes.
You know, we're all kind of looking at bottom line. We're looking at what's going to help us, what's going to be easiest. Check it out. Talk to them. Get a quote, and they will help you out.
And it's at Pimentel, Pimentel, Garcia.com. So you can email them that info. You can go to the website, or you can call 704-272-3535. It's all listed in the show notes. Swipe down and click, baby. You're there. And then get your insurance from a teacher, not from some weird lizard or from some ball guy who says ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-da-da. No, you don't want that. You want it from a teacher. That's where you want your insurance.
When you call up Pimentel Garcia Insurance, make sure you tell them you heard it from us. And now, back to the show.
Finding that balance between, like, okay, here's some expectations and we're going to, like, get stuff done. And I understand that, like, this wouldn't necessarily be the choice of what we're going to, if all of us chose what we're going to do for today or this hour or whatever, that this is where we would be. And kind of backtracking to one of those things, I, kind of used that technique that you said about Bill and Jane or whatever, but I lie. So I will, in the beginning of class, I will say, so I was talking to, Susie the other day, and she said, Mr. Mealy, I'm really curious. Can we learn how to derive the quadratic formula by completing the square? And I go, today, Susie? Today's your day. We're going to derive the quadratic formula by completing the square. And like the other kids like look at Susie and they're like, what's wrong with you? Why'd you ask him that? And Susie's like, I didn't ask him that. I really didn't. I promise I didn't.
It wasn't me.
So I will, whenever there's something that I know is like a really heavy lifting topic that is not going to be fun, I will blame it on some kid claiming that they want to learn about that. And that's always.
Step one is alienate the audience.
Yeah. The other thing I would do by asking people, what did you come here to learn, is on occasion I was set up to fail. And when I mean fail, like hard, I remember once they had me combine elements of Excel 1, 2, and 3 into a single 8-hour class. And I'm like, you do realize all of those are 8 hours apiece, and you want me to teach 3 classes in 8 hours. And they're like, well, it's what the customer wants. And I'm like, somebody didn't inform the customer that's a bad idea. So as people were coming in, and I'm like, hey, what are you hoping to learn? And the guy's like, oh, I want to learn, and I'm getting rusty on my Excel, but insert extended Excel thing here. I want to learn pivot tables. I want to learn pivot tables. Great.
Who doesn't?
And then some other person comes in, and she, not making this up, almost didn't have mouse skills. Like brand new to computers. So what I did in that case is I sat those two people together, because she's going to be overwhelmed big time about 2:00, and he's going to be bored out of his gourd until about 2:00. And so he would help her in the morning, and then in the afternoon, he could also kind of still help her. And I just told him up front, I said, here's the deal. I'm going to feed you today with a fire hose. And the good news is you have these 3 books to refer to, but yada, 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 and go that route. So that also was another tip, that on occasion, that's where I got to teach for a couple semesters at a college. And that's one of the things I loved, is I had the same students every day, because for most of my teaching career, I got new students every single day. And on occasion, you'd have somebody come back, but most of the time it was new people every class.
Okay.
So here's what I love about this so much. I know so many jaded teachers, right? And it's easy to get jaded in the teaching profession. But a lot of them will say things like, well, my students are so dumb and so lazy that they always need me to explain why they have to learn something before they do it. And they always need to know when there's a break before we start working for the day. But I love the reminder that this is something that applies to adults, and it's something that applies to children. And something about humans. Like, we just need certain things, and nobody's just going to sit there and learn like a robot.
No.
Yeah, the big thing, especially with adults, like you can go to a 3-year-old and they'll go, you can say 1 + 1 = 2, and they go, okay. And if you do that to an adult, they'll be like, wait, why? Why does it eat? And you have to explain. So anytime, that's the other thing I did, anytime I learned a new subject. So if they said, hey, here's this new software, here's the book, learn it, your class is in 2 weeks. Any question I had as I went through, I would write down, because I'm like, okay, if I'm having this question, my student's going to have the question, and let's make sure to address that question in either a story or an example or something like that. But yeah, it's just a matter of trying to get all the, it's like, hey, I would just picture the person, if it's a kid, I woke up late because I stayed up too late playing video games or whatever, and they're just, I just want you to kind of put the world outside for a little bit, and let's focus on that. And the other thing in the corporate world, I would say, oh, and by the way, the more you guys pay attention and you don't take tangents, and the quicker we get through this stuff, hey, if we get done at 4:00 and the class is supposed to be over at 5, we're done. And they're like, wait, we can leave early? Yeah, if we get done, if you guys pay attention. All of a sudden, that carrot was right out there, and you'd see them like, Karen, quit looking at your phone. Pay attention.
Right. Yeah. Stop asking stupid questions. Yes. Yeah. So here's another road I want to go down, Dave, and we'll see how this works. Because if I say you're the king of analogies, you're not going to deny that crown, are you? You love an analogy.
I love analogies. It's just, and I don't know why, because
I love them as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I can also say it doesn't come in handy in relationships. Because if you're having an argument with your spouse and you go, well, it's kind of like, and she's like, no, it's not kind of like, just say it. And I was like, I'm sorry. That's just the way I think,
There are analogy people and there are non-analogy people, and non-analogy people don't love it, and analogy people eat it up. And I'm an analogy person, and I love it. No, my wife is not an analogy person either.
No,
I don't know.
Not appreciated.
That's a very small sample size to go gender, to make a gender,
analogies
thing.
are like, awesome.
So I'm going to give you a couple ones here, and I don't know how much you looked at these to prepare, but I'm just going to kind of throw some out here. So you can say life is like, or podcasting like, or teaching is like. Okay, and then and those are your choices. And now a wrestling match.
Okay, podcasting. Well, teaching is like, let's go teaching. Teaching is like a wrestling match. Because there are some times when you walk into a classroom and you're like, oh, I am just outmatched today. It's 25-1 and nobody wants to be here and things like that. But with wrestling, it's all about paying attention to your opponent. Because the minute you take your eye off your opponent, that's the minute you're pinned with your back on the mat. So you've got to keep attention. You've got to be, understand, and you're looking for kind of their weakness, I guess, in this game. That's the case with wrestling. But with them, their weakness is, what do they really need to know? Because that's what they came here for. Mm-hmm. So when you can then find the thing that they need, okay, now you've got their respect. And when you've got their respect, well, they kind of put their guard down, and then it's easy to pin them.
There you go. Okay. I'm going to say sometimes it's like a professional wrestling match where you have to be whispering in their ear and agree okay, I'm going to try to not make this hurt, but I'm going to throw you over this rope one time and you just go with it. And then when I'm done, I'll let you throw me over the rope one time and we can go there.
It's also like that because I have pyrotechnics in my classroom. Does anybody else use entrance music?
Yes, I do. All the time.
It makes every Zoom call better.
That's it. I go, and ladies and gentlemen, now welcome to Excel 1.
Yeah,
exactly.
Oh, okay. We're going to go one more. And again, it can be life, podcasting, or teaching is like baking a cake.
Yeah, I'll go with they both are kind of the same, because to me, podcasting is teaching. It's just a different, way of doing it. You got to have the right recipe. So this is where you could have great examples. You could have the best workbook. You could have a great projector that doesn't, you could have everything you need technically to do it. Mm-hmm. But if you blow that intro, if you blow that, hey, I'm Dave Jackson, and today we're going to talk about this and that, and you just kind of whatever, and now they're sitting there thinking, oh, am I going to get a chance to call on the car that broke down? Like all of a sudden they're not focused because you blew the intro.
Yes.
You blew it. So, if you forget, and I'm so not a baker, I think it's yeast. Yes. If you forget your yeast, your cake is not going to rise, or your bread or anything else you're doing. And it's that one little thing that can just mess up the whole thing. So that would be analogy for that one.
Awesome.
And mess up the intro. That's why I never start conversations with "Hello, Ossifer." It goes downhill from there.
Yeah, it really doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think you pulled me over? Don't you know the answer? You're the one that pulled me over.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't like that. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, you have talked about how you are a lifelong learner, right? So, what connection do you find between, like, being curious, right, and constantly learning, and being a good teacher? Like, how do you apply that into teaching, or how do you think it helps you?
I think some of it is just life, in the fact that if you've ever been, I guess at the airport where they have the moving sidewalks, and life is kind of like you going the wrong way on a moving sidewalk. If you stop moving, you're going backwards. And I have seen that multiple times where, if I was, they come out with a new version of Word. Well, if you want to teach that class, you got to learn the new version, or, I've got to learn this new technology, everything that's coming along.
Very applicable, I was going to say, to teachers right now with teaching online and teachers having to learn Zoom and all these other things that we've had to learn. And if you were not learning along the way, you are having to run down that moving sidewalk to catch up with the teachers who have been learning the whole time.
Well, and just if you stop learning, you're, like I said, you're going backwards. And then the other thing is, the more you learn, the more valuable you are to the company. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I remember when we were down to 2 trainers, and it was Friday, and I got a call. My boss was in Michigan. She's like, I'm here with the general manager, and I heard you did a great job in South Carolina. Well, that again shows we were out of work in Ohio. They're shipping me to South Carolina. She goes, and you did such a great job, and that's why it makes it hard. And I walked into an elevator, and I lost the signal. And it's me and the other trainer, and I go, dude, I've been here before. And he goes, what? I go, it's Friday. General manager's in her office, and she's going to tell me something bad when I get back on the phone. I go, I'm getting whacked. And he said, you've been here longer than I have. I go, you know Photoshop, and I don't. And he goes, nah. And I go, no, I'm here to tell you. And I got back on the phone, and I said, hey, I'm not sure I'm going to like the way you were going to end that sentence. And she goes, this has nothing to do with your teaching ability. You're one of our best, but we've got to do this and that. So had I known Photoshop, I would have been the last guy on the Titanic watching it go down. So yeah, that's another thing. The more you learn, the more valuable you are to a company. And if it's not that company, it's another company that you then get hired at because you kept learning.
Yes.
As somebody who studied English throughout college, did you guys know they kept publishing books after 1800?
I've heard that.
I did not know. Have you heard of a young man named Jack Kerouac? Blew my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, you do have to constantly be learning, and I think it's good for your brain. It prevents senility. It does all that kind of stuff. So even if I'm just learning random weird stuff, you know what I mean? Like I used to really be into fantasy football, and I'm still kind of do that. But then now I'm into podcasting. One of the reasons I listen to your show is because I'm just like a nerd that likes to learn stuff, and I like learning stuff about podcasting.
Well, and you can get stuck. You can have a bad experience. Like in college, you get to read all sorts of stuff, not because you want to, but because you have to. And it's horrible, and it's dry, and it's boring. And all of a sudden you've trained yourself. I hate reading. Mm-hmm. And I remember at my first job, I had a pretty good relationship with the CEO, and I walked into his office one day, and he just had all these books everywhere. And I said, have you read all these books? He goes, not cover to cover, but a big chunk of them. And he goes, college is great. He goes, but you do realize, there are books all over the place, and, the library's free and this and that. And it just dawned on me. I was like, I used to like to read. So I went out and got a book on something that I actually wanted to learn. And what do you know? And that's where I think that's another reason why I like podcasting. I mean, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I like a lot of Kindle books. You know, people go, "Where's your bookcase?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's right here. It's my phone. It's called Kindle." You know, and so I think it's another reason sometimes why we get worried about learning new things. And the other thing is, it's called the learning curve. Nobody likes to feel stupid.
No.
And the first time I tried to tie my shoes or shoot a basketball, you kind of feel stupid, you know, but that's just one of those things where, you know, you don't learn anything without failing. I mean, eventually you're going to do something and you go, oh, so if I don't put my hand on the stove, it won't get burned. Got it.
By the way,
record, I still don't feel good about shooting a basketball.
Okay. By the way, teacher tip, if you happen to be in the principal's office to talk about whatever it is, and the principal has tons of books, and I've done this, say to the principal, hey, I see you got lots of books there. What's one that you think would really help me, with my teaching? And you know what I mean? You were in like Flynn. They were like, oh my goodness, here, let you read this. And you just, you know, and you read it and hopefully you'll get something positive out of it. But it also makes you like look really, really good in your principal's eyes. All of a sudden you're like, oh, you're that guy. You're the one that wants to learn and you actually care about what I care about. So,
the next step is to read that book.
Yeah.
You do need
a record.
Well, I mean, yes, you mean, or like Google a review of it at least.
Read the Amazon reviews, you'll get it.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of books, okay, boom, what a wonderful segue. So Dave Jackson, he's written a book. Neither Tedisco nor I have written a book. You know what I mean? Mostly we're at coloring book level is about where we're at right now.
Yeah.
So we want to like talk about like what your book is because what are the benefits? How can podcasts benefit teachers both from the listening and the doing it for themselves and?
Yeah, there are a couple of things on the listening side. You can, you name it. There's a podcast about it. There is a podcast about chameleon breeding. I'm not making that up. So if there's a subject,
I actually have heard that one. Yeah,
I would rather see YouTube videos instead. Okay,
yeah. I'm good. I definitely prefer not to see the YouTube videos.
So that's the great thing about listening. And when it comes to creating a podcast, what it really ties into now, and it's stuff you do every day, is, okay, I'm going to do a presentation today. It's on such and such and such and such, and here are the main points I want to hit. And then it's just a matter of getting it out of your mouth and that whole 9 yards. And it just gets you used to going with the flow and working on your presentation. It also then lets you see what resonates with your audience. So that's another great thing. You know, you can kind of get feedback in a classroom just by who's paying attention and who's laughing and who's doing the work and things like that. But you do get that feedback. And then depending on what you're teaching about, it whether you want it to or not, it's going to position you as an expert. Mm-hmm. I started a weight loss show because I thought if I did, it would make me hold myself accountable. And it did for about the first 6 months. I lost about, 10, 15 pounds. And then it turns out they were right behind me. I found them. They were there.
They chase after you and they catch up to you like Michael Myers.
They do.
And so it's I should have renamed it the yo-yo diet because that's all I do is go up and down. But when I first started, I would get these insanely detailed questions about my glycogen levels are blah, 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 and white blood. I'm like, look, I don't know if you heard the beginning of the show where I say I'm not a doctor. I'm not a trainer. I'm just a person like you trying to lose weight. But because I was the podcast guy, I'm like, oh, well, you're the weight loss guy. You should know this. And I'm like, no, actually, I'm not. So it will position you as an expert. You also get the ability, if there are certain people you want to talk to in your industry, and if you went up to them and said, hey, could we have coffee sometime? They'd be like, get away from me, kid. You bother me. But if you say, I have a podcast, I would love to have you come share your knowledge on it. They'd be like, oh, where do I sign up for that? So that's the other big bonus of
it is. And so tell us about the book and what's in it and like, give us your elevator pitch on the book and then maybe we'll see if we have any questions about that.
Yeah, it's called Profit from Your Podcast, and it basically is, as the book it's a way to make money with your podcast. It does start off chapter 1 is number 1, your podcast actually has to have an audience. And a lot of people like to skip that step, but it goes into all the different ways you can make money with your podcast, whether that's selling your own stuff, selling other people's stuff. That's called affiliate marketing. There's ads, and there's different types of ads. There's host read ads, there's baked in ads, there's dynamic ads, and then there's free stuff. There's all sorts of different ways you could do that.
There's signing $100 million deal with Spotify. I've heard you could do that.
You can do that. I've heard that. But again, that's a great example. So many people like, oh, I want to be like Joe Rogan. I'm like, okay, first things first, start your comedy career in the 80s in Boston, then get on TV for, like, he's done like 3 different TV shows. It's like, Joe didn't just start like last month. It's like he's been working on this a while, but there's a big section on crowdfunding. A lot of people like Patreon, and there's all these different tools. And so a lot of it is actual, here is a person, here's what they did, here's what happened with his audience kind of thing. It's not just me saying, oh, if you do this, you'll get money. It's like, no, here's somebody who did this, and here's how it's working. And so my one of my favorite examples is Mark does a show called Beyond Bourbon Street. Mark grew up in New Orleans. I say New Orleans. I'm in Ohio. I think it's New Orleans. Yeah. And he wanted to do something besides all the touristy stuff. And he just kept talking about 2 chicks walking. It's a walking tour. And all of a sudden, the 2 chicks came up to Mark and they said, Mark, we don't know what this pod thing is that you're doing, but you've tripled our business. And Mark said, well, we should probably talk about you becoming a sponsor then. And so it's just stuff like that you're like, okay, but it's hyper niche. That was a show. And it's really about serving your audience or in this case, maybe serving your students. And so Mark was like, okay, I'm talking about New Orleans. What are people going to need? Well, they're going to need a tour, and I can't do that. So these people can do that. And then he also worked a deal with Old Number 77, which is this old hotel in that area. It's very ties in with the podcast, and got them as a sponsor. So it's all about what does my audience need and what can I give them for that. So it's all the different ways that you can make money with a podcast.
Speaking of which, we are always looking for sponsors. So if you are a teacher and you've got like a website or a book or whatever it is that you're trying to make money, we are definitely open to sponsors. We have, and we don't have a super big audience yet, Dave. But you know,
you have teachers, and this is what people don't understand. What if I made a project specifically for teachers?
Exactly.
Right. If I could go advertise in, I'm going to education magazine and you know whatever blah 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 magazine. But some of those, like, well, some teachers might read that and some teachers might read that. And so, like, this is a podcast for teachers. Your audience is teachers. If you're trying to reach that audience, you've got them right here. So.
Exactly. So that is the value that we do bring, is that if you have something that's specifically for teachers, that we are your people, especially teachers who are unprofessional, because that's what we are. So
there you go.
So lazy, goofy, silly teachers is our demographic here,
as we call it.
Nice.
Yes, the lazy, goofy, silly triad.
Tedisco, did you have any more questions? Because I'm about out.
No, I don't think I do. I'm going to think of one at 3 a.m, though, so I'll call you guys up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you just go onto the copier and you look at the number of whatever that is, and you ask Bill instead.
Right.
By the way, that really
the
is
key
genius.
master.
Yes. No, because there are, and that's one of the things that I was telling Tedisco, and another thing that we were doing earlier that I've used that is that we're online now, and a lot of times there's kids asking questions that I don't have the answer to, like in terms of, or I don't have time to go post something in the chat. And so I will just say, hey, Johnny, can you, or whoever knows the answer to this website where we're supposed to submit our homework, can you post the link in the chat and designate somebody else? So whenever you can delegate stuff like that, it definitely makes your job, a whole lot easier as a teacher, you know?
There you go. And you're building your community that way.
Exactly.
When you can get your students helping each other, that's even better.
Exactly.
But then how do you start the infighting and making sure that they hate each other enough that you can tear them apart?
That's it. Now the matter of like, great, I have a great community. Can you guys, I'm teaching again. Can you shut up for a second, please? Yeah.
Yes. The Machiavellian teaching strategy.
It's easy, Tedisco. You tell them, you said, listen, you say, I'm going to step outside this door. And when I close that door, the first 5 people out of the room get an A. And the second 5 get a B, okay? And the rest of you are failing. And then just walk out and let the chaos begin. So,
I don't think you need to say anything. I think you just walk out of the room. And the chaos takes care of itself.
That's true. They are young people. They will find something,
Dave, does that apply to adults too? I'm curious. If you leave the room or take your eyes off of them.
If you, on occasion, I would teach where a company bought a whole class. And that was always fun, because if it was a bunch of strangers, they all had their, I'm going to be proper and I'm going to, you know. But if it was somebody and they all knew each other, yeah, there were times when you're like, look, I understand, because to them they're like, hey, we don't have to work today. It's awesome. It's like it was almost like substitute teacher day, right?
It is.
Like, we can do whatever we want. We don't care, you know. I'm like, and so there were times like, look, I want to have fun, but like, you know, easy does it there.
I was gonna say, if you've got that one class clown that is gonna like push your buttons and see if they can, and I'm sure it applies to you. I have 3 rules for teaching, Dave, that I think apply. You need to love what you're teaching. Okay. Number 2, you need to love the people that you're teaching. And then number 3, you need to be able to own the room. Because if you cannot own the room, they will eat you alive. And you strike me as someone that doesn't have a hard time owning the room. You know, not necessarily the alpha in terms of being dominant, but but can command a presence.
Well, it was always fun when you had the student that wanted to show that they knew more than you did. Mm-hmm. The whole, like, I don't need this class kind of person. Yeah. And they're like, well, did you know that such and such and such and such, you know? And on occasion, if they like threw something at me, I didn't know. That's really cool. And what was fun is then later you'd say like something and I'd be like, well, I'm sure someone, you know, Smarty Pants here can do that. And then they go, I've never heard of that. I'm like, okay, good. So you don't know everything. So there was always occasionally you get that guy. Oh, I'm going to show you how I don't need this class. Like, so happy you're here. Great. Wonderful.
That's how I feel every professional development. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. Well, Dave, we're not going to take up any more of your time. I just want to say thanks again. We really appreciate you doing this. And for those of you that are definitely interested in podcast, even if you haven't thought about doing it yet, but you're just maybe I'd like to, definitely check out his you just Google School of Podcasting. He's on every place that you get a podcast. And if you need some kind of assistance, he has various things that you can do through his website that you can he can train you up, he can teach you all the ins and outs, and not to like try and steal your business, but contact us as well. We you know, that's one of the things I've learned from your show and learned from just being a podcaster, that podcasters like helping podcasters. Whether you get help from Dave, whether you get help from us, we want you to have a podcast. You know what I mean? And it's awesome. And so please, do that for us. So Dave, again, thanks. We appreciate you, and give his podcast a listen. And as always, guys, stay unprofessional.
Thanks for listening, Unprofessionals. Next week, it's just going to be me and Mealy. Just us. So, if you're interested, here's a little taste of the future with just us. Well, I do like the jump. I love teaching middle school. It's not for everybody. It definitely takes different skill sets, but it has helped me get a lot of perspective. So, you know, this year with virtual learning and whatnot, I have a lot of, you know, kids and parents who are really, really stressed out, you know, as expected. You know, kids, you know, their parents want them to do as good as possible.
Yes.
And in the back of my mind the entire time, I'm just thinking like, I was just teaching seniors where my grade determined whether or not they graduated. I don't really care what you get in 7th grade English, and neither does the rest of the world.
No.
Learn something. That's our goal. Do you want a B? Fine. Like,
have you found a lot of feast or famine? It seems to me that my kids' grades, yes, that it's like, it's A's and B's and like F's and maybe a few D's. It's like either, if you're trying because the teachers, and you and I, we know are teachers that show a lot of kids a lot of grace, because we're kind of being like, okay, if you're doing it, you're getting a good grade. Then it's either you're doing it, you're getting a good grade, or you're not doing it at all, and then you're failing. Is that kind of what your experience?
In my class, are definitely either thriving or drowning. Like, absolutely. And even in terms of like test grades, like I gave them a test the other week, and they had a study guide. You remember middle school tests. And now that everything's online, it's not like I can say, all right, kids, close your books. So everything's open book, everything's open study guide, because otherwise we're just penalizing the kids who are following the rules when anybody can cheat. So we're just opening the doors for you and saying, cheat.
I literally
vocab questions, and you can look up words in your dictionary.
There you go.
Kids either aced it or bombed it, and that was it.